crew over here. I like it. A lot of good answers, I hope, are coming. But let's start off with the data strategy that came out yesterday. We've been waiting for it for a long time. I know at least us at FedScoop. So first, initial thoughts from it after seeing it for 24 hours now?
Sure. Am I on? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's some initial reactions. It's going to take some time to digest the latest update of the federal data strategy and some of the action items in there. I had been focusing mostly at the ones towards the end of it that are related to agency-specific items. Probably my initial reaction is to focus more on the governance aspect of it. Think hard about some of the evaluations of the infrastructure capabilities that are in there, and start to socialize that more around the business executives, program executives across GSA. To get their input and thoughts as well as the CIO, of course, because there's going to be a strong partnership there.
Any other takers?
So I'll mention the fact that we were already in the process of working to create a common data strategy across the Department of Defense. The challenge was the Army had a data strategy, and the Navy had one, and the Air Force had one, and Transcom had one, and SOCOM had one, and DLA had one, and DFS had one, and they all look different. And the list is longer than I just gave you. So I've been working with the military department CDOs to create a common data strategy, which will then be supported by implementation plans in each of those spaces. And we've been tracking the OMB work around the guidance for the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. Haven't seen anything really breakthrough in that space that we weren't expecting, but we now have to retrofit the work we've done on our data strategy to make sure it fully aligns with the OMB expectations. And that's to be expected. That was always going to be the case.
Yeah, you mentioned the Foundations of Evidence-Based Policymaking. It's a long title. Let's crack that nut. That's a big one. That it requires, among other things, that there be CDOs at every agency by July. So obviously, most of you on stage are already CDOs. But what are you taking away from that law that was passed last year, and particularly among the new requirements that are going to come out of that? How OMB is guiding you along the way?
I'll take a shot at that as maybe the outsider from the government group. I really liked that it was calling out for the need for cross-functional teams. And one of the things that struck me when Michael and I talked and Mona and I talked was that one of the first things all of us did in our roles was try to gather a cross-functional team, even across agencies, and the legislation seems to be aligned with that. One of the things that struck me as unusual from an industry standpoint is that it called out having the reporting structure be in through the CIO office. And in industry, there's been a huge transition in CDO roles, moving from reporting in through the CIO. When it first started, it was all about data. And then the title even changed from CDO to CDAO. Analytics became part of it. And the thought was it's not about the data, it's about what you do with the data. And now some of the titles have changed yet again. A lot of new officer names are Chief Transformation Officer, and it's about the outcome. It doesn't matter the analytic that you're running, it doesn't matter the data, it matters the outcome. And the one thing that disappointed me a little bit in the way that it was written is it was less about the outcome and it seemed a little bit more about the data.
I think I would echo that. From my perspective, one of the biggest challenges is to make sure that the role and the legislation isn't used as primarily a reporting and compliance function, and that whether it's an evaluation plan, that we don't end at the plan, that there is an action that's tied to it, because I think all of our agencies would likely say that we have great evaluators and researchers, and so what's the difference here moving forward? That's really in the action that's tied to it. Also, I think the role itself, the data piece of it, can make people think that this is just a very quantitative role. It's not, and I think we've all experienced that. It's really a general management role. It's a management role because you are creating something from the ground up that didn't exist before for most of our departments, whether it's the technology stack to enable the data sharing, whether it's the organizational management structure, or whether it's how you actually connect data now for the first time, not just as a research tool, but an organizational management tool that can drive an organization towards more effective and efficient use of its resources. And that's really the ultimate driver, I think, for what all of us are doing. And I hope that in implementing this act, we follow that vision and not just the compliance and the letter of the law.
You know, I'd like to build on that. I serve the DoD, and the DoD has a culture of making decisions on things other than data. We make decisions on the basis of rules, like the Uniform Military Code of Justice, rules of engagement, and we make decisions based on instinct and experience. We don't have a culture of making decisions based on data. And one of my big challenges coming in is reshaping that culture. This piece of legislation goes a long way to provide the authoritative direction and guidance necessary to help shift. I wouldn't say that the organization is resisting actively. It's not. It's very receptive. But there's 65 years of experience that I have to now reset, recalibrate, change behaviors, create a whole bunch of supporting content and infrastructure, new skills, new attitudes. And without this act, I think it would be a lot harder than it looks like it's going to be now.
Chris, anything?
One of the things, I agree with everything that was said, and kind of the overlying intent there it was to have somebody who's focused in a standalone position to do that work. Not to have this be, at least, this is my interpretation of it, my interpretation of what's coming out of the federal data strategy around chief data officer. It isn't to say I want this C-suite person to also be the CDO. It is saying we want agencies to have a CDO. And it's not being very prescriptive with that definition, but I think the intent there is how do we stand up a standalone position that is focused on all of the things that was just talked about? And how do we make that work in government? I think there's clearly going to be cultural clashes there. I think the federal government has your traditional management C-suite organizations, and it has been relatively the same for probably 10, 15 years. And now there's this, how do we introduce this new capability, this new person? So it'll be interesting to see how that rolls out government-wide.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the role of the chief data officer is not going to have a lot to do with data. It's going to be management and culture change and things like that. But Alan, you mentioned, it sounds like, at least on the industry side, things are kind of sped up and kind of left the government in the dust in some senses in the role of the traditional CDO in making things more about mission outcome and driving outcome analytics and things like that.
Yeah, certainly, when you look at where CDOs are coming from, a huge percentage of CDOs don't come from traditional IT programmatic backgrounds. I mean, of the people on the stage, Johns Hopkins Medicine, career in government, Treasury, I think IRS, and we have a programmer and an engineer who grew up designing vehicles for a living. So I think, absent of the legislation, what I see the government doing is the mix that we see industry doing. The way that the legislation was written, it could be read as it sounds like it's a bit more IT than maybe it is meant to be. But certainly in practice, you see a very diverse set of people filling the roles, and the teams that you would want in those organizations need to be equally diverse.
What I'd like to build on that a little bit. When I talk to my peers, whether it's the peers on the panel or whether it's my peers in government more broadly or in the commercial sector, the thing that strikes me uniformly is we all know that data is a means to an end, not an end in itself. And that means you've got to bring all the other means, the culture, the infrastructure, the rest. But we all know that it's not an end in itself. And we all know that we're pioneering. And I think it's fair to say that while there are pockets of excellence in government, like at HHS, in many parts of the government, we are behind industry. The state of the art's being created every single day in the consumer-facing side of the commercial sector. And we can borrow, we can learn, we can take advantage of that. And many of us are actively working to do exactly that, to take advantage of those skills, those lessons learned, those proven workloads and approaches. And it's a treadmill because it all changes every day.
So I'm going to go a little off script here, but it was something you guys were talking about backstage earlier, and it's, you guys meet as a council, the CDOs, and you guys are existing CDOs. There's a lot of agencies that might not necessarily be there yet, but how are you guys meeting and kind of shaping that discussion in the background, and what kind of, effects is that having as part of the CDO council?
I mean, there's been a number of, I've been CDO for I think 4 years, maybe I passed 4 years. And you've seen these positions grow and grow, and more people get hired into these positions at department level, agency levels. So it's sort of a mixed bag. And if I was to poll the people in this room, or even the people within agencies, say what are the 2 or 3 things a chief data officer in government focuses on, you're probably going to get about 30 different responses to that, right? I mean, it's a huge range. I think there's overlap. I think there's things that we're all trying to focus on and trying to figure out. Hiring talented data scientists into government is one. Developing a good government and strategy model in our organizations is another. Like, how can we get together and focus on these areas and collaborate, and what are best practices we can use to make sure that it's a little bit more consistent across government? So right now it's a lot of informal. We're not a huge group of people. We all kind of know who each other are. We run into each other at events like this and catch up. Hopefully through the CDO Council that's part of the federal data strategy, hopefully that starts sooner rather than later so that we can start to engage more frequently.
I just also wanted to add, it's a little bit of an aside, but as there's an increasing emphasis on AI strategies as well, I think we all know that you cannot have an AI strategy without a robust data sharing and infrastructure in place. And so I think that's also an important piece of the conversation that we're all probably grappling with within our respective departments, because there's so much focus that people want to have on that, which is kind of the glamorous part of the conversation. And I think a lot of us are probably working to pull back the conversation too, to say you can't get there until you do this first.
I would even add the sharing, I don't think, is just between government agencies. Michael and I were talking beforehand. I think you've had Alteryx in to share work that Alteryx has done. Sometimes the role that Alteryx as a software vendor plays isn't Alteryx coming in and sharing the work we've done. We pair up industry partners and have the industry partner talk to the folks at the different agencies. And I think that's a vital role that should continue to be fostered in these CDO councils. Can we have industry mixing with government and sharing those best practices?
In fact, one of the set of expectations I've given to my data scientists as I bring them on board is that we're going to sit down and we're going to determine what specific steps you're going to take to add 3 professional relationships in the department, 3 in the broader federal government, and 3 in the commercial sector that you don't know today. They're going to help you bring those best practices into the department. They're going to help us lift our game by taking advantage of what other people know. My experience says if we do that deliberately, it'll happen. If we don't do that deliberately, it's not going to get there at all. And so we sit down and we actually work out a plan for each of our people to make sure that we're all extending those networks, because we need to be able to pull on our peers wherever they happen to be.
Chris, you mentioned, that one of the most important elements, and I think it's on the tip of everyone's tongue every day in the federal IT community, and Scoop News Group launched a new publication overnight called WorkScoop. So I'm going into the direction of the workforce issue, the hiring of the really talented data scientists, and it's a sticky problem. I know there's not an easy answer, so it's hard for me to even ask you, like, what are we supposed to do, or how do you do that? But what's on your minds when you think about hiring those people? It doesn't even have to be hiring. It could be reskilling or training current employees. But what kind of initiatives are on the tops of your minds, and what are you thinking about to kind of address that problem?
I know everybody else is going to want to chime in on this also. I'll go pretty quickly. One of the things is how do you take a lot of these IT type skill sets, right, when you get into some of the coding work that is necessary to be a good data scientist, and how do you incorporate those types of skill sets into a business analyst position description without having someone say that person should work for the CIO? Like, at a high level, we have to do a better job of saying the business analyst of the future is also going to be pretty strong in technology background. That's just the direction we're heading. And we got to be able to figure out a way to do that.
Yeah, I broaden that a little bit. I completely agree. Just broaden by adding these. Data science is a multi-domain activity. And if they don't bring the math and statistics, both descriptive and inferential, if they don't bring the ability to code, if they don't bring domain subject matter expertise, if they don't bring soft skills, they're less likely to be successful. And so we either select for that, or we have to groom for that. and develop them to get them there. But all of the systems we have internally for human resource management don't understand this concept of a multi-domain, multi-dimensional kind of role. We're going to be successful despite that. We're going to overcome that. But the very first question I ask in a job interview is, do you code Python or R? And I don't care which, but if you don't code at all, I thank them for their time and I show them the door, because they're just not going to get the job done for me. I don't know how you feel about that. I'd love to hear your views.
So it's interesting. I think when you're starting off this kind of an endeavor, and you're building the organizational infrastructure, some of those harder skills are less necessary, and then they become more as you move forward, and that's kind of what I found. Just to add, in parallel to what we've been doing, we've also started a data science training program for the department. We had a pilot program where we had 20 people, and it was incredibly successful. We opened it up, and without really advertising it, we had 600 people apply, which tells you the immense amount of demand that we actually just are not in a position to be able to meet right now. And so one of the things that I'm looking at is, moving forward, what kinds of training programs can we offer that may be less hands-on than what we've done in the past, and more self-service, and people can really begin to amplify the skill sets they have, and also if they're coming in with nothing, what does that curriculum look like? And I think that is something increasingly that we need to do in a more coordinated way, and is really incumbent on the federal government to make sure that we're training what we cannot necessarily recruit for right now.
So, I'd add, in industry, we have the same issue. How do you attract the best talent in the world? And in the end, I think it comes down to three things, and the government has most of these. You have to have amazing problems to go work on. And all of you guys have great problems to work on.
We got better than anybody.
Yeah, so you have to have great technology. You have to be able to, people who are in the data science profession don't want to use an abacus. They need data science tools, right? And if you don't have the right technologies, that's going to dissuade them. And then the third one is, you have to have a culture. And whether the culture is, I want to work with cross-functional teams, or I'll pick fun at myself, I'm going to wear jeans to work today. Is it okay? Yeah. You have to have a culture that is supportive of this new wave of employees that wants to come in. And as long as you have those three things, I think you can attract phenomenal talent. And again, I think many of our federal agencies have those three things.
So let's end on a positive note and talk about what's working. And we have a couple minutes left, so if each of you want to run through a cool project or something, a success, something, it doesn't have to be a project, but just something that is a, aha, this is what being a CDO is about, and this is why it's, things are going in a good direction.
I think for me, and it goes to a lot of what Mona was saying, we too have been trying to push more training capabilities for existing business analysts and program analysts to obtain more skills to be able to consume data in different ways, not just produce a report and hand it to somebody, but to be able to start doing storytelling and start talking about recommendations and start to build capacity to be, okay, the next step is predictability. You know what's going on right now, but based on this, what's going to happen tomorrow? And start to get people to think more in an analytical frame of mind and more into the recommendation piece and storytelling piece. I think, it's very easy for people to say, well, here's the information you asked for, I'm done. And that's, that's a culture, at least within GSA, at least within a few of the other agencies I've been in. And trying to get past that and get more to, give me a recommendation. What are the risks here? What are the benefits of us making these decisions? Because you can't just hand something to a leader and say, make a decision off this. You have to guide them and coach them and advise them and be a trusted partner with them. So those are the types of things we're pushing out. We're seeing a lot of, people, taking advantage of that and jumping on that. There's analysts who really want to do that capability. There's still, people at various levels of organization like, that's not really our job. We're just here to tell you the status quo.
So I would say that there has been some culture shift, which has been great, of not looking at data as a primary sort of just a research tool, but a strategic asset. And I've seen people begin to use that language, and over 2 years, that's been a marked shift. I think where we need to continue to do work is really embedding the data enterprise into the chief operating officer role, and really making sure that the link between data and operations is seamless. Because that's really, I mean, to Chris's point around, having information that's actionable, you also need to have a pathway that's actionable. And that really needs to be in place.
What really thrills me is not when I see the small elite data science squad go solve a problem. We'll never have enough of those on our teams probably. It's when I see the analysts, the thousands of them, that are armed with great technology, access to data, and they solve amazing problems, because that's scalable. That's something that we can really transform, whether it's the government or industry with. That's when it really gets exciting to me. And so when I come to work every day, actually watching the data scientists work with those analysts and help bring them along, it's the teaching and the training, that's really what gets me going.
Yeah, and I'll just build on that real quickly. I think that's exactly right. There's never enough operational resources for one group to get everything done. You have to act as a force multiplier and get the entire organization behind it. And one of the things that really excites me, as you were just describing, is all of our financial analysts are now building into their professional development plans the absorption and use of these analytical techniques right across their job responsibilities, and we're seeing them build it into their professional development institutes. We're seeing them take the additional training, and most importantly, we're seeing them apply it to deliver direct benefits both for the warfighter and for the taxpayer. So we're seeing real results in terms of improved affordability and performance because we're acting as a force multiplier in that community.
Great. Well, let's leave it at that. Michael, Alan, Mona, Chris, thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause.